Now let's get to the bit you've all been thinking about, Edward and Bella's relationship. Now, a lot of people have issue with it because he's either, in their opinion, outright jealous or borderline abusive. Now, I will not say he's abusive. I don't think he is whatsoever. But I understand why people think he's jealous, and to be frank, he is a little jealous. But people don't understand that Edward is forever stuck at 17 years old. In Meyer's world, vampires are completely frozen. They're frozen with their loves, their likes, their dislikes, things they hate, things they just don't care about. That's frozen. You're stuck in that temperament and in that position. There is a little change that happens, like Edward talked about love, but that's rare, and when it happens it completely alters who you are. So Edward is stuck at 17 years old. If a 17-year-old saw another guy making out with his girlfriend or just trying to get with his girlfriend, don't you think he would be jealous? I think it's completely valid. Still, there are people that still consider Edward abusive, and they normally point out their first sexual experience. At the end, she's bruised and hurt, but this is because she was a human, and he was a vampire, and his strength was something he couldn't manage during that. Now, a lot of people neglect to point out that Bella is the one that pressures Edward into their first sexual experience. He wanted to wait till they were vampires together. And so it's really not his fault. She's the one doing the pressuring. However, there are people that would point to the idea that he might be emotionally abusive. Edward does not want Bella around Jacob, and although yes, it is partially about jealousy, it's mostly about fear. If Jacob got angry, he could transform into a wolf and seriously injure or even kill Bella. And this isn't just a guess or an overcalculation. It's actually shown throughout the course of the novels and the films, because there's Emily, and Emily got seriously hurt by her fiancé Sam, and is actually permanently scarred because he got angry when he transformed. Edward really just wants to protect Bella, and there's other points that we see that too. For instance, in the beginning of Breaking Dawn, he's bought her a car that has missile-proof glass. Is it a bit extreme? Yes, but he's in love with someone who's very fragile compared to him, and he just wants to make sure that she's safe. And while we're on the idea of feminism and her being completely wrong, Bella isn't just a character that stays static despite what people say. She's someone that grows, and she finds things that are more important than her relationship with Edward, or her friendship with Jacob, for that matter. When they get pregnant, Edward wants to abort the baby. But Bella loves her child, and she decides to go against not just Edward, but Jacob, and the advice of many other individuals. She found something to love and to cherish, and something that's more important than that relationship she has with her husband. She's moved into someone that has things that matter. And at the end of the novel, Bella isn't the damsel in distress anymore. She's become a hero. Her power and abilities that she's discovered as a vampire are what she uses to protect not only her child, but Edward, Jacob, the Cullens, werewolves, or shape-shifting wolves, and a score of other vampires. It's a mental battle, but she's fighting against Jane, who is one of the most dangerous villains in the entire Twilight series. She's moved from damsel in distress to hero, and one that's willing to die for her child, and honestly, I think that's amazing. She's moved from the weak pawn to the powerful queen. Another issue many people have is the writing style. However, I'd like to point out that if a book was narrated by a 17 or 18-year-old girl and was written like Jane Austen, people would complain too. In fact, Twilight has gotten people to read lots of classic literature because it's mentioned in the stories. There's even a special Twilight edition of Wuthering Heights. But what about the lines in the films? Now, when it comes to people's issues with the first film, I 100% agree. I think it's a terrible adaptation, which is why I was really surprised that you gave it better points. They take scenes from the story and smush them together, specifically the one behind me at the moment, where they took 3 completely different scenes with 3 completely different emotional feels and different tones and tensions, and tried to smush them together. it turns into something that it's definitely not, and makes the line seem much more silly. For instance, the heroine line made a lot more sense. It was more of a, oh, so it's like this, as opposed to, you're my heroine. Sounds silly for people that haven't read the book and don't know the source material. That being said, I do think New Moon did a very good job, and although Eclipse did rush things a bit, I think the lines and the pacing and the tone was much, much better than the first film, which was just a disappointment. So I guess that means we're done here. Okay, I know you want me to talk about the mythology. Well, I will admit that sparkling is not very menacing, but let me take a second to first explain my vampire cred. I have liked vampires since I was watching Sesame Street and eating my Count Chocula. My favorite TV show of all time is Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and I live for Buffy, by the way. And since we're talking about vampires and wolves, I think Underworld is awesome. And I like vampires so much that I tracked down Nosferatu, which is the first vampire film. When it comes to books, I'm all over vamps too. From classics like Interview with the Vampire, to more recent things like the Cirque du Freak series, and I even have my own vampire encyclopedia. And let me make this very clear, what I've shown you is just a small sampling of my vampire collection. But people have an issue with the sparkling and going in the sun and all that. Now, as I pointed out already, I'm not a big fan of the first adaptation. However, when it comes to the sparkling, I love what David Slade did in Eclipse. The books say it's like diamonds, and diamonds reflect the sunlight. They're not pixie powered. And that's actually what it looks like in Eclipse. So I'm happy with it, and it's not so abruptly girly or whatever. But that being said, a lot of people still have issues with it, and honestly, I think that's silly. Nobody cares that in Buffy, the vampire's faces change. Nobody cares that in Underworld, there's a vampire-werewolf hybrid. Nobody cares that Darren Shan is only a half vampire, or that the vampires have their own complicated system of religion. The fact of the matter is, Twilight isn't even doing that much of a departure from very ancient myths. In early vampire stories, there wasn't a requirement to stay away from the sun. Although it was just more convenient to go out at night, people would notice the dead guy. Plus, the fun of fantasy is that the writer gets to have control. It's their universe, their rules. If we take that away, then it would be silly, because every vampire genre, every story, is unique in its own way. So, I hope I've changed your mind a little bit about something I really like, or at very least, made it so you understand why an educated, smart person, particularly women, can't enjoy this. And I guess now I'm done pointing out the flaws in your videos, because for the most part, I love your stuff. I mean, there's not another thing that I disagree with. Well, maybe.